Abigail Montgomery trudged through the dusty main street of Whispering Creek, clutching her market basket close to her chest, feeling the familiar sting as townspeople's gazes slid past her like she was nothing more than a shadow. It was 1876, and at 22 years old, she had already been branded with a fate worse than death for a woman in the Western Territories being deemed unmarriageable. "There goes the Montgomery girl," whispered Mrs. Thornton to her companion as Abigail passed the general store. "Such a shame about her face. Even her father's property won't tempt a husband." Abigail kept her eyes down, her honey-brown hair falling forward to shield the left side of her face, where an angry red birthmark sprawled from her temple down to her jaw. She'd heard it all her life: too ugly, too marked, damaged goods. Even her own mother had given up hope of securing her a match before she'd passed away 3 years ago. The April sun beat down on her shoulders as she made her way to Mr. Greeley's mercantile. Inside, she handed over her list to the shopkeeper, who barely acknowledged her presence. "Your usual supplies, Miss Montgomery. Your father's account will cover it," he said, bustling about to gather her items without meeting her eyes. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Greeley," she replied softly. As he packed her purchases, the bell above the door jingled. Abigail kept her head down but couldn't help noticing the sudden change in the shopkeeper's demeanor. "Mr. Blackwood, what brings you to town?" Greeley's voice had risen half an octave, infused with newfound cheer. "Supply run, mister." "Greeley, the ranch won't stock itself." The deep voice drew Abigail's attention despite her best efforts. She allowed herself a brief glance at the newcomer, tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. "A cowboy by the looks of his worn leather chaps and dusty boots. You're staying on then, turning the old Turner place around?" Greeley asked. "That's the plan. Just me and a couple of hands for now, but I aim to make something of it." Abigail gathered her packages, keeping her damaged side turned away as she prepared to leave. But as she moved toward the door, her elbow caught a display of canned peaches. The tower wobbled precariously. Strong hands steadied the display before it could topple, and Abigail found herself face to face with the cowboy. She froze, knowing her birthmark was fully visible to him. "Careful there, miss," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. She waited for the usual reaction: the widening eyes, the quick aversion of gaze, the poorly masked grimace. But it didn't come. "Thank you," she murmured, ducking her head and hurrying past him. "Miss," he called after her, "you forgot this." She turned back reluctantly. He was holding the small package of sugar she'd purchased. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, Ryder Blackwood." He held out the package, and when she took it, their fingers brushed briefly. "And you are," she blinked, unaccustomed to such direct address from a stranger. "Abigail Montgomery." "Miss Montgomery." He touched the brim of his hat. "Pleasure to meet you." As she fled the store, she could feel his eyes on her back, and for once, she didn't sense pity or revulsion in the gaze that followed her. The Montgomery homestead sat a mile outside of town, a modest but well-maintained property with a small orchard, vegetable garden, and chicken coop. Her father, Samuel Montgomery, had settled here after striking a modest claim in the silver mines. He wasn't rich, but they were comfortable, which only made Abigail's unmarried state more conspicuous. Even plain girls with property found husbands in the territories, where women were scarce. She found her father at the dining table, his accounting book spread before him. "There's my girl," he said warmly, though she noted the shadow of concern in his eyes, the same concern that had deepened with each passing year. "Get everything we needed." "Yes, Pa." She began unpacking her goods, describing her errands in town, but omitting her encounter with Ryder Blackwood. What was the point? A man like that, handsome, capable, with his own ranch, would never look twice at her, regardless of whether he'd been polite in the store. That evening, as she stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson, she allowed herself a rare moment of self-pity. She'd long ago resigned herself to spinsterhood, to caring for her father until his passing, then living out her days alone. She'd made peace with it, or so she told herself. But sometimes, on quiet evenings like this, she ached for something more. A week passed before Abigail ventured into town again. This time, it was to deliver eggs to the boarding house run by the widow Jenkins. Mrs. Jenkins was one of the few people in town who treated Abigail with genuine warmth, never seeming to notice or care about her disfigurement. "These are beautiful eggs, Abigail," the older woman said, examining the basket. "Your hens are productive this spring. Thank you. We've been blessed with healthy stock this year." Mrs. Jenkins smiled. "Would you like some tea before you head back? I just baked an apple cake." Before Abigail could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Raised voices and the sound of breaking glass had them both hurrying to the window. On the street outside, 3 men were circling a fourth, who stood with his back to the boarding house wall. "Oh, not again," Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "That's Roy Carlson and his boys. They've been causing trouble since they rode in yesterday." Abigail squinted through the glass. "Who are they targeting?" "That new rancher, the one who bought the Turner place. Blackwood, I think his name is." Abigail's heart lurched. Ryder Blackwood stood calmly, hands loose at his sides, as the 3 men, clearly intoxicated, taunted him. "I should get the sheriff," Mrs. Jenkins said, already heading for the door. Without thinking, Abigail slipped outside and approached the confrontation. She didn't know what she could do, but she couldn't just watch. "You think you can just ride in here and take over prime grazing land?" the largest of the men, presumably Roy Carlson, was saying. "That property was supposed to go to locals, not some drifter from back east." "I purchased it legally," Ryder replied, his voice calm but firm, "and I have no quarrel with you or anyone else in this town." "Well, I got a quarrel with you," Carlson spat, reaching for his gun. "Stop," Abigail called out, surprising herself as much as the men. "Sheriff Winters is on his way." All 4 men turned to look at her. The Carlson boys snickered when they saw her face, but Ryder's expression remained unchanged, steady, with a flash of concern for her safety. "Well, if it ain't the monster girl," the youngest Carlson jeered. "What's it to you if we teach this fella a lesson?" Abigail flinched at the cruel moniker but stood her ground. "Mrs. Jenkins has gone for the sheriff. Do you want to add jail time to your visit to Whispering Creek?" Roy Carlson hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he spat on the ground near Ryder's boots. "This ain't over, Blackwood." "Not by a long shot," he gestured to his companions. "Come on, boys." As they stumbled away, Ryder approached Abigail. "That was either very brave or very foolish, Miss Montgomery." "Mrs. Jenkins really did go for the sheriff," she said, suddenly self-conscious under his direct gaze. "Still, you didn't have to step in." His eyes gray with flecks of blue, she now noticed, studied her with an intensity that made her want to hide and stand taller all at once. "I couldn't just watch them attack you for no reason." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Then I'm in your debt." He glanced down the street. "May I walk you somewhere? I'd hate for those men to give you trouble on my account." Abigail hesitated. No man had ever offered to walk with her in public before. "I was just delivering eggs to Mrs. Jenkins. I should be getting home." "Then I'll escort you home." When she began to protest, he added, "I insist. It's the least I can do." And so Abigail found herself walking through town alongside Ryder Blackwood, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. She kept waiting for him to maintain a distance, to angle himself away from her marked side as others instinctively did. But he walked close beside her, occasionally commenting on the town or asking her questions about the area. "Have you lived here long?" he asked as they left the town limits. "All my life. My father came out for the silver strike in '53, met my mother here and settled down. It seems like a decent enough place." "It is, for the most part," she couldn't help adding, "though people anywhere can be cruel when faced with something different." He glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. People fear what they don't understand, or what challenges their narrow view of how things should be. They walked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I noticed your father's orchard when I rode by last week. Apple trees, aren't they?" "Yes, and some pear. Pa planted them when I was little. They're productive now. I've been thinking of planting an orchard at my place. Might ask your father's advice sometime if he wouldn't mind." Abigail nodded, wondering if this was just polite conversation or if he truly meant it. As they approached her home, she felt a strange reluctance for their walk to end. "This is it," she said, gesturing to the modest house with its whitewashed fence and neat garden. Ryder looked over the property approvingly. "Your family has built something fine here." "Thank you for walking me home, Mr. Blackwood." "Ryder, please." He touched the brim of his hat. "And thank you again for your intervention. I don't much care for fighting, especially over misunderstandings." As he turned to leave, Abigail found herself calling after him, "Mr. Black Ryder." He turned back, eyebrows raised. "Would you like to come in for some lemonade? It's a warm day for walking." He smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I'd like that very much, Miss Montgomery." "Abigail," she offered softly. "Abigail," he repeated, and something in the way he said her name made her heart flutter in a way it never had before. Samuel Montgomery was surprised but cordial when Abigail introduced Ryder. After initial pleasantries, the men fell into easy conversation about ranching and the challenges of the territory's unpredictable weather. Abigail served lemonade and listened, noting how Ryder spoke intelligently but never condescendingly, how he listened as much as he talked. "So you're planning to raise cattle primarily?" her father asked. "Cattle and horses," Ryder confirmed. "I worked on a horse ranch in Wyoming for several years. I have some ideas about breeding stronger stock for this region." "Ambitious," Samuel commented. "The Turner place has good water, but the previous owner let it go to seed. Nothing some hard work won't fix. I've got 2 good hands working with me, and I'm looking to hire a few local men." As the conversation continued, Abigail found herself studying Ryder when he wasn't looking her way. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or 32, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. His hands were calloused and strong, but his movements were precise, almost gentle. He wore no wedding ring. When Ryder finally took his leave, he thanked them both for their hospitality. "I meant what I said about seeking your advice on fruit trees, Mr. Montgomery. Perhaps I could call again sometime." "Anytime," her father replied warmly. "Always glad to help a neighbor." At the door, Ryder turned to Abigail. "Thank you for the lemonade, Abigail, and the company." "You're welcome to visit again," she said, surprised by her own boldness. Something flickered in his eyes, interest, perhaps, or simple appreciation. "I'll take you up on that." After he'd ridden away, her father gave her a curious look. "Nice fellow. How did you come to meet him?" She told him about the incident in town, downplaying her own involvement. Her father frowned at the mention of the Carlson boys, those troublemakers. "I've heard rumors they're trying to intimidate smaller ranchers into selling cheap." He shook his head. "You be careful, Abby. Don't get involved in their disputes." "I won't, Pa." But even as she said it, she knew she was already involved in ways she couldn't quite explain. That night, as she brushed her hair before bed, Abigail found herself studying her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. Most days, she avoided looking too closely, having learned young that dwelling on what couldn't be changed only led to heartache. But tonight, she forced herself to really look. The birthmark was just as it had always been, a raised, reddish-purple stain that covered nearly a quarter of her face. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to see beyond it. Her eyes were a clear hazel, more green than brown. Her unmarked cheek dimpled when she attempted a small smile. Her lips were full, her chin determined. "You're still you," she whispered to her reflection. "Marked or unmarked." She thought of how Ryder had looked at her directly without flinching or avoiding the birthmark. Not with pity or disgust, but with simple recognition of her as a person. It was such a small thing, and yet it felt monumental. True to his word, Ryder returned to the Montgomery homestead the following week, ostensibly to discuss orchard planning with Samuel. He brought with him a book on fruit cultivation and several questions that led to a lively discussion. Abigail served coffee and her fresh baked bread, listening as the men talked about soil types and water needs. When her father was called away to deal with a problem in the barn, Abigail found herself alone with Ryder at the kitchen table. "Your father knows a great deal," he commented. "I appreciate his willingness to share his knowledge. Pa loves talking about his trees. They've been his pride since the mine gave out." "And what about you, Abigail? What's your pride?" The question caught her off guard. Few people asked about her interests or passions. "I suppose my garden and my preserves. Mrs. Jenkins says my peach jam is the best in the county." "I've no doubt." He smiled, then seemed to hesitate before continuing. "I wanted to ask, are you familiar with the area northwest of town, past the creek, some of it? Why? I've heard there's a stand of wild plum trees there. I thought I might look for cuttings if I could find them." "Oh. Yes, there is, about 3 miles past Cottonwood Creek. They bloom beautifully in spring. Would you," he paused, then seemed to make up his mind about something. "Would you consider showing me sometime? It's easier with a guide who knows the land." She stared at him, searching for the jest or pity in his request, but found only sincere interest. I could, I suppose, if Pa doesn't need me here. This Sunday, perhaps? I could come by mid-morning if that suits." Before she could answer, her father returned and the conversation shifted back to farming matters. But when Ryder prepared to leave, he reminded her, "Sunday then, for the plum trees." With her father looking on curiously, she nodded. "Sunday." After he'd gone, Samuel raised an eyebrow at his daughter. "Plum trees? He wants to see the wild grove past Cottonwood Creek," she explained, feeling her cheeks warm. "For cuttings." Her father studied her face for a long moment. "Abby, he seems like a good man, but be careful with your heart." Men like Ryder Blackwood, handsome, ambitious, they usually have their sights set on certain types of women. The unspoken message was clear, not women who looked like her. "It's just plum trees, Pa," she said softly. "Nothing more." But as Sunday approached, Abigail found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She chose her best dress, a simple blue calico that her mother had always said brought out the green in her eyes. She braided her hair neatly and pinned it in a crown around her head, the way she'd seen fashionable women wear it in magazine illustrations. Ryder arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, riding a handsome chestnut gelding and leading a gentle-looking mare. "I thought you might prefer to ride rather than walk all that way," he explained. "This is Daisy. She's as sweet-tempered as they come." Abigail hesitated. She knew how to ride, everyone in these parts did, but it had been years since she'd been on horseback for pleasure rather than necessity. "Come on," Ryder encouraged. "It's a beautiful day for a ride." And it was. The May morning was perfect, with a clear blue sky and wildflowers dotting the grasslands. As they rode side by side, Abigail gradually relaxed, enjoying the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her and the open landscape around them. "How are you settling in at your ranch?" she asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Well enough." "There's more work than hours in the day, but that's ranching for you," he glanced at her. "I hired 2 local men last week, brothers named Collins. Do you know them? The Collins boys. Yes, they're good workers. Their father was a foreman at the mine before it closed. They've been a great help. Knowledgeable about the land, too." He guided his horse around a rocky outcropping. "What about you? Have you always wanted to stay in Whispering Creek?" The question stirred something in her, a long-buried dream. "I used to think about going east to my mother's family in Boston." She had a sister there. She smiled ruefully. "I had girlish notions of city life. What changed? My mother died. Pa needed me here, and—" She trailed off, not wanting to mention how her aunt's letters had gradually stopped coming, how the promised invitation to visit had never materialized after her mother sent a daguerreotype of Abigail. Ryder seemed to understand what she left unsaid. People can be short-sighted about what truly matters. They rode on, crossing Cottonwood Creek where it ran shallow and clear. Abigail pointed out landmarks and shared stories about growing up in the area. Ryder was an attentive listener, asking questions that showed genuine interest in her experiences. When they reached the wild plum grove, the trees were just beginning to blossom, their delicate white flowers bright against the dark branches. "It's beautiful," Ryder said, dismounting and helping Abigail down from her horse. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and she felt a flush creep up her neck. They walked among the trees, Ryder examining branches and occasionally taking notes in a small leather-bound book. Abigail watched him work, appreciating his methodical approach. "These would do well transplanted, I think," he said, gently bending a young branch. "The soil at my place is similar." "My mother used to make the most wonderful plum preserves from these," Abigail told him. "She'd add cinnamon and a touch of brandy. Sounds delicious." He straightened up, tucking his notebook away. "I brought some lunch if you're hungry." They spread a simple meal on a blanket under the tree's bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of honey. As they ate, Ryder told her about his life before coming to Whispering Creek. He'd grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. At 18, he'd headed west, working his way across the country as a ranch hand, miner, and eventually foreman on a Wyoming horse ranch. "I saved every penny," he explained. "Knew I wanted my own place someday. When I heard about the Turner Ranch going for sale, it seemed like the right time." "And do you have family back east still?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, my parents are gone. I had a brother, but he died at Gettysburg." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "What about you? Just your father?" "Yes, my mother had a difficult birth with me. The doctors said she shouldn't have more children." She picked at a blade of grass. "Sometimes I think that's why she was so disappointed in me, her only child and marked as I am." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She'd never spoken so candidly about her birthmark to anyone. "Disappointed?" Ryder's brow furrowed. "Did she say that?" "Not in so many words, but I saw it in her eyes whenever she looked at me. The way she'd try to arrange my hair to hide my face in public. How she'd apologize to visitors as if I were something broken." Ryder was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "My father had a saying about beauty. He said true beauty is like good metal, it needs to be tempered by fire to show its strength." Abigail looked at him skeptically. "That's a kind sentiment, but it's not sentiment, it's truth." He leaned forward slightly. "Abigail, when I look at you, do you know what I see?" She shook her head, afraid to hear his answer yet needing to know. "I see a woman of extraordinary grace, someone who's faced cruelty and emerged kind. I see intelligence in your eyes, strength in how you carry yourself." His voice softened. "And yes, I see beauty, not despite your birthmark but with it. It's part of who you are." Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them back. "You don't have to say these things." "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face from the marked side of her face. "The people in town, the ones who have made you feel less than whole, they're the ones with the real disfigurement. A blindness of the heart." The tenderness in his touch, the sincerity in his words, undid something in Abigail, a knot of shame and resignation she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her natural state. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Ryder's thumb gently brushed it away. "I've upset you, I'm sorry." "No," she whispered. "No one has ever seen me that way before." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility, but before either could speak again, the distant rumble of thunder broke the spell. "Storm's coming," Ryder said, glancing at the darkening western sky. "We should head back." They packed up quickly and mounted their horses, riding at a faster pace as the wind picked up and the sky grew more threatening. They were still a mile from the Montgomery homestead when the rain began, fat, heavy drops that quickly became a downpour. "There's a line shack ahead," Abigail called over the rising wind. "We can shelter there until it passes." They urged their horses toward the small structure, a basic one-room cabin used by cowboys when working this section of range. Inside, it was dusty but dry, with a small stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and a narrow cot. I'll see to the horses, Ryder said, leading both animals to the lean-to attached to the shack. Abigail found an old lantern and some matches, and soon had a warm glow filling the small space. By the time Ryder returned, rain-soaked and shivering slightly, she'd also started a small fire in the grate. "You're drenched," she said, concerned. "Here." She offered him a threadbare blanket she'd found on a shelf. "What about you?" he asked, noting her own wet clothing. "I'm not as bad." But her teeth chattered slightly as she spoke. "We both need to get warm and dry." He draped the blanket around her shoulders instead. "You take this. I'll be fine by the fire." They sat side by side on a bench near the hearth, listening to the rain pound on the roof and the occasional crack of thunder. Despite her wet clothes, Abigail felt a different kind of warmth growing inside her, a tentative hope she scarcely dared acknowledge. "When I first came to town," Ryder said after a while, "I heard whispers about the Montgomery girl, how her father couldn't find her a husband despite having property, how it was such a shame about her face." Abigail stiffened, the familiar shame washing over her. "I didn't pay much attention," he continued. "Gossip is rarely worth listening to, but then I saw you in the mercantile." He turned to look at her directly. "And I couldn't understand what they were talking about. All I saw was a beautiful woman who wouldn't meet my eyes." "Ryder." She began, uncertain what to say. "I'm not a poetic man, Abigail. I say things plainly, but I need you to understand something." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her cold ones. "I came to your house to talk about fruit trees because I wanted to see you again. I asked you to show me the plum grove because I wanted to spend time with you. Not out of pity, not out of some misguided nobility, but because from the moment I saw you, I felt something I've never felt before." Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he must hear it. "How can that be true?" "You don't even know me. I'm getting to know you, and everything I learn makes me want to know more." His eyes held her steadily. "I'm not asking for anything right now except a chance to court you properly if you're willing." Abigail's mind reeled. She'd never imagined anyone would want to court her, let alone someone like Ryder. "The town will talk," she said weakly. "Let them. I've never much cared what others think." His smile was gentle. "What do you think, Abigail Montgomery? Would you allow me to call on you?" In that moment, with rain drumming on the roof and firelight dancing across his earnest face, Abigail made a decision that would change the course of her life. She would not let fear or the judgment of others determine her happiness. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "Yes, I would like that very much." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night, and when he leaned forward to press a gentle kiss to her forehead right over the edge of her birthmark, Abigail felt something inside her heel that she hadn't even known was broken. The storm passed eventually, and they made their way back to her home in the fresh, washed afternoon. Samuel Montgomery watched from the porch as they approached, relief at their safe return mingling with surprise at the changed dynamic between them evident in how closely they rode together. In the way, Ryder helped Abigail from her horse with lingering care. "Glad you found shelter," he said as they explained about the storm. His eyes moved from his daughter's flushed face to Ryder's protective stance beside her, understanding dawning in his weathered features. "Mr. Montgomery," Ryder said formally, "I'd like your permission to call on Abigail." Samuel's eyebrows rose, but to his credit, he showed no disbelief or mockery at the request. He simply looked at his daughter questioningly. "This is what you want, Abby?" "Yes, Pa," she said softly but firmly. "It is," Samuel nodded slowly. "Then you have my blessing." He extended his hand to Ryder, who shook it firmly. "But understand this, my daughter has had enough hurt in her life. I won't stand for more. Sir, my intention is only to bring her happiness if she'll allow it." "Good. Then you'll stay for supper and we'll talk more about these plans of yours." News traveled fast in Whispering Creek. By the end of the week, everyone knew that Ryder Blackwood was courting Abigail Montgomery. The reactions ranged from disbelief to mockery to outright hostility. "Must be after her father's land, Mrs. Thornton speculated loudly in the mercantile when Abigail was within earshot. No other reason a man like that would look twice at her. Perhaps he lost a bet, another woman suggested with a cruel laugh. Abigail pretended not to hear, but each barb stung. Still, she held her head higher than before, refusing to hide her face or scurry away as she once might have. Ryder, for his part, seemed oblivious to the gossip. He called on Abigail regularly, bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflowers gathered on his ride over. Sometimes they sat on the porch swing, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Other times, he helped her in the garden or assisted her father with repairs around the homestead. On Sunday afternoons after church, which Ryder had begun attending, sitting proudly beside Abigail despite the stares, they would often ride out together, exploring the countryside. During these outings, Abigail felt freest away from judging eyes, able to simply be herself with a man who genuinely seemed to enjoy her company. It was during one such ride, about a month into their courtship, that they encountered the Carlson brothers again. Abigail and Ryder had stopped by a small lake to rest their horses when three riders approached from the opposite shore. "Well, if it ain't the pretty couple," Roy Carlson called mockingly as they drew near. "Still determined to make a go of the Turner place, Blackwood? It's my land now, Carlson." "I suggest you remember that." Ryder's voice was calm, but Abigail could sense the tension in his posture. "For now," the older man sneered. "But word is you're having trouble getting your cattle drive organized. Shame if you were to lose your investment before you've even started." "Is that a threat?" Ryder's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but Abigail placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Just an observation." Carlson's gaze shifted to Abigail, his eyes cruel as they lingered on her birthmark. "Though I can see why you're distracted, must be quite the novelty." Ryder took a step forward, but Abigail tightened her grip on his arm. "They're not worth it," she murmured. After a tense moment, Ryder nodded. "We're done here, Carlson. Stay off my land and we'll have no problems." The brothers laughed but rode on, tossing back insults as they went. "What did he mean about your cattle drive?" Abigail asked once they were alone again. Ryder sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm having some difficulties. Several of the men I'd hired to help with the drive have backed out. Carlson's been spreading rumors that my operation is doomed to fail." "Why would he do that? He wants my land. His family used to graze cattle on it before Turner fenced it off. He thinks if I fail, he can buy it cheap." Ryder shook his head. "But don't worry, I'll figure something out." But Abigail did worry. She could see the strain in Ryder's eyes, the way his shoulders carried a new tension. The cattle drive was critical to his ranch's success. Without it, he couldn't get his herd to market, and without that income, the ranch wouldn't survive the year. That evening, after Ryder had escorted her home, Abigail approached her father with an idea. "Pa, Ryder's having trouble finding men for his cattle drive. Could we help spread the word? Maybe some of the miners who have been out of work since the Silver Bell closed would be interested." Samuel looked up from his newspaper. "Possibly. Times are hard since the mine shut down. Men need work." He studied his daughter's concerned face. "You care for him a great deal, don't you?" "I do, Pa." She busied herself with her mending, not meeting his eyes. "More than I thought possible." "And does he feel the same?" She thought of how Ryder looked at her, how he sought her opinion, how his hand always found hers when they walked together. "I believe he does. Then I'll talk to some people tomorrow." Her father folded his newspaper. "A good man deserves a fair chance, especially when he's been good to my daughter." True to his word, Samuel Montgomery spoke to his old mining contacts. Within days, Ryder had 5 experienced men signed on for the cattle drive, former miners eager for work, willing to learn ranching skills. It wasn't enough for the full drive, but it was a start. When Ryder came to thank them, his gratitude was palpable. "I don't know how to repay you both." "No repayment necessary," Samuel insisted. "Neighbors help neighbors." Later, as Ryder and Abigail walked in the orchard, he took her hand and pulled her gently to a stop beneath a flowering apple tree. "It wasn't just neighborliness, was it?" he asked softly. Your father's help, she smiled up at him. Pa likes you and I couldn't bear to see you worried. Abigail? He touched her face, his fingers tracing the edge of her birthmark with a tenderness that made her breath catch. Do you know what you've come to mean to me? Before she could answer, he lowered his head and kissed her softly at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. It was her first kiss, and nothing like she'd imagined in her private dreams. It was better warm and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, she was trembling slightly, her heart racing. Ryder's eyes were dark with emotion as he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I think I've loved you since that day in the mercantile when you wouldn't look at me. Tears pricked at her eyes. I love you too, but I'm afraid. Of what? That this can't last. That you'll wake up one day and see what everyone else sees when they look at me. He shook his head firmly. What I see when I look at you is the woman I want to spend my life with. He took a deep breath. I had planned to wait, to court you properly for a few more months at least, but life is uncertain and I'm sure of how I feel. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver ring with a modest pearl. This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it, as my wife. Abigail stared at the ring, then at Ryder's hopeful face. You want to marry me, truly? More than anything I've ever wanted. He smiled, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. What do you say, Abigail Montgomery? Will you make me the happiest man in the territory? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when he kissed her again, she felt as if her heart might burst with joy. Their engagement announcement was met with the expected mixture of reactions in town. Some, like Mrs. Jenkins and a few others who had always been kind to Abigail, offered sincere congratulations. Others barely disguised their disbelief or made snide remarks about Ryder's motivations. He must be desperate for that land, Mrs. Thornton said loudly in church the Sunday after the news broke. Or perhaps he lost his sight in addition to his senses. Abigail, who would once have shrunk from such cruelty, now held her head high, Ryder's hand firm in hers. Mrs. Thornton seems concerned about your eyesight, she murmured to him as they took their seats. He smiled, raising her hand to his lips in full view of the congregation. My vision has never been clearer. The weeks that followed were busy ones. The cattle drive was scheduled for mid-July, and Ryder spent long days preparing for it, training his new hands and organizing supplies. Meanwhile, Abigail and her father began planning for the wedding, set for early September after Ryder's return. Despite the joy of their engagement, Abigail couldn't help noticing the increasing tension between Ryder and the Carlson family. Roy and his brothers seemed determined to cause problems spooking Ryder's cattle, spreading more rumors in town, and once even damaging a section of his fence. They're trying to provoke me into a fight, Ryder explained when Abigail expressed her concern. But I won't give them the satisfaction. This drive is too important. The day before Ryder was to leave with his herd, Abigail rode out to his ranch to bring him a package of food for the journey. She found him in the corral, working with a spirited young horse. That's quite a gift, he said appreciatively when she presented the package of jerky, biscuits, and her special peach preserves. Almost makes me look forward to trail food. I'll miss you, she said, suddenly emotional at the thought of his 3-week absence. It would be the longest they'd been apart since meeting. He pulled her close, uncaring of the dust on his clothes or the ranch hands watching from a distance. I'll miss you more. But think of it this way, when I get back, we'll be that much closer to our wedding day. She nodded against his chest, breathing in his scent of leather and sun-warmed skin. Promise me you'll be careful. The trail can be dangerous. I promise. He tilted her chin up to look at him. I have too much to come back to. That evening, as they said their goodbyes at her home, Ryder kissed her with a passion that left her breathless. 3 weeks, he murmured against her lips. Wait for me. Always, she promised. The days of Ryder's absence crawled by. Abigail kept busy with wedding preparations and her usual chores, but her thoughts were constantly with him, wondering where on the trail he might be if he was safe, If he was thinking of her two weeks into the drive, a dusty rider arrived at the Montgomery homestead. It was Pete Collins, one of the brothers Ryder had hired. "Miss Montgomery," he called, dismounting quickly. "Got a message from Ryder." Her heart leapt to her throat. "Is he all right?" "He's fine, miss, but there's trouble." The Carlsons showed up with some hired guns, claiming we're driving our herd through their grazing rights. Pete handed her a folded note. "He asked me to bring you this and to fetch the sheriff back with me." With trembling hands, Abigail unfolded the paper. "Dearest Abigail, we're delayed near Eagle Pass. Carlson is trying to block our route, demanding payment for passage. I won't be bullied, but I'm concerned about his men's readiness for violence. Pete will explain to the sheriff. Don't worry, I'll be home to you as promised. All my love, Ryder, Pa." Abigail called, her voice sharp with fear. "We need to find Sheriff Winters." Samuel read the note and immediately began saddling his horse. "I'll go with Pete to find the sheriff. You stay here, Abby." But as soon as they had gone, Abigail made a decision. She couldn't sit at home waiting, not knowing if Ryder was in danger. She changed quickly into her riding clothes, packed a small bag with necessities, and saddled her mare. Eagle Pass was a day's ride away, longer if she was careful with her horse. But Abigail knew the land well, including some shortcuts through the hills that might save time. Without allowing herself to consider the impropriety or danger of a woman riding alone, she set off. She rode hard that day, stopping only when necessary to rest her horse. As twilight approached, she made camp in a small protected hollow she knew from childhood expeditions with her father. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with images of Ryder facing down the Carlsons. At first light, she was back in the saddle, pushing toward Eagle Pass. By mid-afternoon, she began to see signs of a large herd having passed through trampled grass, cow droppings, the occasional discarded item from the drive. As she crested a hill overlooking the pass, she saw them Ryder's herd gathered in the valley below, with cowboys stationed around the perimeter. On the far side, another group of men was camped, their intentions clear from the rifles visible even at this distance. Abigail urged her horse down the slope, heart racing. A cowboy spotted her approach and raised his rifle before recognizing her. "Miss Montgomery," he called in disbelief. "What in tarnation are you doing here? Where's Ryder?" she asked, scanning the camp. "Over by the chuck wagon with the boys, but miss, this ain't no place for a lady, there's trouble brewing." She ignored his warning and rode directly to where Ryder stood with several of his men, deep in discussion. When he looked up and saw her, his expression transformed from surprise to alarm to a strange mix of exasperation and joy. "Abigail," he strode toward her, helping her down from her horse. "What are you doing here? It's not safe. I got your note. I couldn't just wait at home, not knowing if you were in danger." She gripped his arms. "Has there been violence?" "No, not yet. We're at a stalemate." He led her away from the men toward a quieter corner of the camp. "Carlson's demanding an outrageous sum to let us pass. He claims this is his land now, though I know for a fact it's open range. The sheriff should be on his way. Pa and Pete went to fetch him yesterday." Relief flashed in Ryder's eyes. "That's good news." He touched her face gently. "But you shouldn't be here, Abigail. If things turn ugly, then I'll be beside the man I love," she said firmly. "I'm not some delicate flower, Ryder. I've lived in this territory my whole life." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head with a rueful smile. "I should have known you'd be too stubborn to stay put." His expression sobered. "But I mean it, if shooting starts, you find cover and stay there. Promise me." "I promise." They were interrupted by a shout from one of the lookouts. "Ryder's coming from the east." Ryder's hand went to his gun, but then his posture relaxed. "It's the sheriff, and your father." Sure enough, Sheriff Winters rode into camp minutes later, followed by Samuel Montgomery and several deputies. The sheriff looked unsurprised to see Abigail there, merely nodding to her before turning to Ryder. "Blackwood, heard you're having some trouble. Carlson claims we can't pass without paying him, says he's got papers for this land now." The sheriff spat into the dirt. "That's horse manure." This is federal range land, has been for years. He adjusted his hat. Let me go have a word with Roy and his boys. I'll come with you, Ryder said. No, Sheriff Winters was firm. You stay here. This needs a cool head. They watched as the sheriff and his deputies rode across to the Carlson camp. Samuel dismounted beside his daughter, giving her a look that promised a later discussion about her impulsive journey. You all right, Abby? I'm fine, Pa, just worried. Ryder's got good men with him. And the sheriff knows his business. The wait seemed interminable. Abigail stood close to Ryder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. Finally, they saw the sheriff riding back, his expression grim but determined. Carlson's backing down, he reported. Told him I'd arrest the lot of them for obstruction and attempted extortion if they didn't clear out. He looked at Ryder. You can move your herd through at first light. My deputies will escort you past their camp. Relief washed over the assembled cowboys. Ryder extended his hand to the sheriff. Thank you, I'm grateful for your intervention. Just doing my job, though next time maybe file your drive plans with my office before you head out. The sheriff tipped his hat to Abigail. Miss Montgomery, your father's right upset about you riding out here alone. Can't say I blame him. Samuel, who had been notably silent, finally spoke. Abigail, you'll ride back with me at first light. Let Ryder finish his business without worrying about your safety. She wanted to protest, but the look in her father's eyes stopped her. Yes, Pa. That night, after a simple meal around the campfire, Ryder found a moment alone with Abigail away from the others. I'm still not happy you put yourself at risk, he said, taking her hands in his. But I can't deny it does my heart good to see you. I couldn't bear not knowing if you were safe. She squeezed his hands. Are you angry with me? Angry? No. He shook his head, a smile playing at his lips. Impressed by your courage, yes. Amazed by your stubbornness, definitely, but never angry. He drew her close. You know, when I first decided to settle here, I thought the hardest part would be building the ranch. I never expected to find a woman who would challenge me, support me, and love me despite all odds. I never expected to find anyone who could look at me and truly see me, she replied softly. Not my birthmark, not my father's property, just me. I see you, Abigail Montgomery. I've always seen you. He kissed her then, under the vast star-filled sky, surrounded by the sounds of the cattle drive and the distant howl of a coyote, a kiss that spoke of promises, and a future neither had dared imagine before finding each other. The rest of the cattle drive proceeded without incident. True to his word, Samuel took Abigail home the next morning, though not without extracting a promise from Ryder to return safely within the week. The town buzzed with news of the confrontation at Eagle Pass. For once, the gossip favored Abigail and Ryder tales of her bravery in riding out alone, of Ryder's calm leadership in the face of Carlson's threats. Even Mrs. Thornton seemed to reassess her opinion, grudgingly admitting to Mrs. Jenkins that, perhaps there's more to the Montgomery girl than her unfortunate appearance. When Ryder returned, successful and flush with the proceeds from the cattle sale, Whispering Creek had to acknowledge that he was proving himself a capable rancher and businessman, not a desperate fortune hunter, as some had suggested. And when he immediately sought out Abigail, presenting her with a bolt of fine silk for her wedding dress purchased in the city, few could doubt his genuine affection. The wedding took place as planned in early September, with the little church in Whispering Creek filled to capacity partly from genuine well-wishers, partly from the curious. Abigail wore a simple but elegant dress of cream silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers instead of a veil. She had decided against trying to hide her birthmark on this day of all days. The man waiting for her at the altar loved her exactly as she was. When she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw only Ryder, his eyes shining with love and pride, his smile wide and true. In that moment, all the years of hurt and shame fell away. She was not the marked girl, the pitied spinster, the subject of cruel whispers. She was Abigail Montgomery, soon to be Abigail Blackwood, loved and cherished by a good man who saw beauty where others saw only flaws. "You are so beautiful," Ryder whispered as she reached him, loud enough only for her to hear. "So are you," she whispered back, her heart full to bursting. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife, and Ryder kissed her before the entire town, Abigail felt a sense of completion she had never thought possible. This was her new beginning, her chance at happiness she'd long ago resigned herself to never having. The celebration afterward was held at the Montgomery homestead, with tables set up under the apple trees and lanterns strung through the branches. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Even those who had once been unkind to Abigail seemed caught up in the joy of the day. Mrs. Jenkins approached the couple as they took a moment's rest from dancing. "I always knew you had a special heart, Abigail," the older woman said, patting her hand. "It just took a special man to recognize it." She turned to Ryder. "You take good care of her, young man. She's one in a million." "Don't I know it?" Ryder replied, his arm tight around his new wife's waist. As the evening progressed, Samuel Montgomery asked for everyone's attention. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, standing beside the newlyweds. "As a wedding gift to my daughter and new son-in-law, I'm signing over the west section of my property, the land that adjoins Ryder's ranch. Together, they'll have one of the finest spreads in the territory." There were cheers and congratulations. Abigail hugged her father, tears in her eyes. "Pa, are you sure? This is too much." "I'm sure," he said firmly. "The land should stay in the family, and this way you two can build something lasting together." Later, as Ryder led Abigail away from the celebration toward the buggy that would take them to their new home, his ranch house, freshly painted and prepared for her arrival, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for how her life had changed in just a few short months. "Happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Ryder asked, helping her into the buggy. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, but before starting the horses, he turned to her with serious eyes. "I make you this promise, Abigail. I will spend every day of our life together making sure you never doubt your worth or your beauty again. And I promise to be the kind of wife you deserve, strong when you need strength, gentle when you need comfort, and always believing in you as you've believed in me." With those vows, more meaningful even than those spoken in the church, they began their journey home and their journey together. The next 5 years brought changes to Whispering Creek and to the Blackwood Ranch. With the addition of Samuel Montgomery's land, Ryder expanded his operations, adding more cattle and developing a successful horse breeding program. The ranch, now known as Blackwood Heights, became one of the most prosperous in the county. Abigail flourished as a rancher's wife. She maintained her gardens and orchards, winning ribbons at the county fair for her preserves and becoming known for her hospitality. More importantly, she grew into her confidence, no longer hiding her face or avoiding town. The cruel whispers gradually died away, replaced by genuine respect for her capabilities and character. In their second year of marriage, Abigail gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, a perfect, unmarked child with her father's storm-gray eyes and her mother's honey-brown hair. 2 years later came a son, Samuel, named for his grandfather. And in their 5th year together, they welcomed another daughter, Elizabeth. The children brought new joy to their lives, but it was the love between Abigail and Ryder that remained the foundation of their happiness. Each day seemed to deepen their connection, their understanding of one another growing alongside their shared dreams for the future. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their expanded ranch house watching their children play in the yard, Ryder took Abigail's hand in his. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" he asked. "If I hadn't decided to buy the Turner place, if you hadn't been in the mercantile that day." "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "how different my life would be." She looked out at their thriving ranch, their beautiful children, then back at the man who had changed everything for her. But then I remember what you told me once, that true beauty is like good metal, tempered by fire. My father's wisdom, Ryder smiled. He would have loved you. Perhaps all those difficult years were the fire, she mused, preparing me for this happiness, making me strong enough to recognize it when it came. You've always been strong, Abigail, stronger than you knew. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the finger that still wore his mother's pearl ring alongside her wedding band. I'm just grateful I was the one who got to show you. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Abigail leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. Once, she had believed her birthmark was a curse, dooming her to a life of loneliness and shame. Now she understood it had been, in its way, a blessing, a test that had revealed the true hearts of those around her. And in Ryder Blackwood, she had found the truest heart of all, a man who had looked past what others could not see beyond, who had recognized the beauty in her spirit when everyone else had been blinded by a mere mark on her skin. I love you, she whispered, words that never lost their power no matter how often they were spoken between them. And I love you, he replied, drawing her closer as their children's laughter floated on the evening breeze, the sweetest music to accompany the most unexpected and precious of love stories.